Hi, very good morning to you all, and a warm welcome to all our viewers for this podcast program. On the show, you're watching the YouTube channel Skepter, and I'm your host, Dr. Mani Iyer. Before we start, I request all of you to kindly subscribe, like, and share this video podcast with all your friends and families. And also don't forget to press the bell button. Thank you. Now, imagine receiving 10 compliments in a day. But it's that one negative comment that stays with you long after the day is gone or the day is over. Or think about how easily we replay an awkward situation. Worry about something that hasn't even happened yet. Or keep thinking about a mistake we made years ago. It's interesting how our minds often seem to focus more on what's wrong than what's right. We all experience negative thoughts from time to time, but have you ever stopped to ask ourselves why? Is it simply a habit, or is it overthinking, or is there something more to the way our brain is designed? Why do certain thoughts seem impossible to let go of, while positive experiences fade so quickly? And perhaps the biggest question of them all is there a way to understand these patterns and respond to them differently? These are questions that many of us may have wondered about, and today we're going to explore this the fascinating psychology behind them. In this episode, we'll be talking about why our brain focuses on negative thoughts, where this tendency comes from, how it influences our emotions and behavior, and what psychology has to say about it. It's a topic that is relevant to every one of us because at some point or another, we will all find ourselves in a cycle of worry, self doubt, or overthinking. So let's dive in and ponder over and analyze this question and why does it happen? And in order to do this, we are joined by renowned psychologist Miss Aisha Khalil. Miss Aisha Khalil is has done a master's degree in clinical psychology and has been practicing. He's a practicing psychologist for the past 2 years. She has completed clinical training and her internship at the famous Nimhans University in Bangalore with experience in Department of Psychiatry, gaining exposure to a wide range of mental conditions. She has worked as a full-time psychologist across several organizations, including serving as a mental health counselor at the juvenile home in Bengaluru, where she worked with adolescents and young adults in conflict with the law. She is currently an independent practicing psychologist, providing therapy to individuals across different age groups for concerns including anxiety, stress, depression, relationship issues, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, self esteem, and emotional well being. Her therapeutic approach is primarily based on CBT technique, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy technique, which, while integrating with other evidence based techniques, to tailor treatment according to each individual needs. So, with this, I welcome Ms. Aisha Khalil to the show. Miss Aisha Khalil, a very good morning to you, and you know, and best wishes. So kindly, you take over the show. The floor is all yours.
A very good morning, Dr. Mani, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because this is one of those topics that every single one of us can relate to. Whether you are a student preparing for exams, a working professional, a parent, or even someone who generally considers themselves emotionally strong. And negative thoughts are something we have all experienced. So, as psychologists, one of the questions we hear quite often is, why does my mind always think negatively? Or why do I always expect the worst? It's a it's truly a concern that many people have. Sometimes people even feel guilty about it. They say, I know I shouldn't think like this, but I just can't help it. And I think that's where today's discussion becomes important. Before we talk about changing our thoughts, first we need to understand why they occur in the first place. And one thing I'd like everyone listening to know is that having negative thoughts by itself is completely normal. And let me repeat that because it's important. Having negative thoughts does not mean that there's something wrong with you. Many people assume that if they are thinking negatively, they are becoming mentally weak or they are developing anxiety, or maybe something is wrong with the personality. But that's not how psychology looks at it. Our brain produces thousands of thoughts every single day. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, and some are neutral. And we don't consciously choose every thought that enters our mind. Just because a thought appears doesn't automatically make it true, nor does it define who we are. So let's get to know about this with a few examples. For example, we imagine you are waiting for a medical report. Even if you are generally a calm person, you might suddenly think, what if something is seriously wrong? Or the next example is suppose your manager messages you saying, can we talk? And for the next few minutes, your mind might immediately start coming up with different possibilities. Did I make a mistake? Am I in trouble? Did I forget something? Now, I'd like to tell you something. None of these thoughts necessarily mean that something bad has happened. They are simply possibilities that your brain is generating. Similarly, imagine you have sent someone a message and they haven't replied for several hours. One person may think they are probably busy. Another person may think maybe they are upset with me. A third person may think, did I say something wrong? This situation is exactly the same. What's different is how each person's brain interprets it. This is really important. So it's the same situation, but each person's brain interprets the situation differently. And this is something we'll come back to later when we discuss how our thoughts influence our emotions. Another interesting thing I have noticed, not just in my professional life, but even in everyday life, is that our mind rarely gives equal importance to both positive and negative thoughts. So, or we can say it doesn't give equal importance to positive and negative experiences. So, let's say 10 people appreciate your work, you truly feel happy. But then just one person criticizes it. What usually happens for many of us, that one criticism keeps playing in our mind long after the compliments have faded. Or maybe you have had a really productive day, you have completed all your work, you have been appreciated, everything has gone smoothly. But at the end of the day, you remember that one awkward interaction or that one small mistake. It's almost as though the brain has a magnifying glass for negative experiences. And that's exactly why people often ask, why can't I just focus on the positive? That the interesting part is that this doesn't happen because we are choosing to be negative. In most cases, our brain has simply learned what it has learned to do. And understanding that difference is incredibly important. Because if we believe we are seeing simply negative people, we start blaming ourselves. But if we understand that there's a reason behind these thought patterns, we become much more compassionate towards ourselves. Now, there's something important. I also want to clarify something else before we move ahead. There's a common misconception that psychology teaches people to think positive. That's actually not true. As psychologists, our goal is not to replace every negative thought with a positive one. Imagine someone has an exam tomorrow. If they think, I haven't studied enough, that thought may actually be helpful because it motivates them to prepare for the exam. Or imagine you're crossing a busy road. Your brain tells you, look both ways before crossing. That's also a form of negative prediction. But it is very useful at that moment because it keeps you safe. So, negative thinking in itself is not the problem. The real question is, when does a useful warning become excessive worrying or overthinking? When does normal caution become overthinking? When does planning become catastrophizing? And when do these thoughts start affecting our sleep, our relationships, our confidence, and our daily functioning? Those are the questions psychology tries to answer. So, today's discussion isn't about eliminating negative thoughts altogether because honestly, that's neither possible nor necessary. Instead, today's discussion is about understanding why our brain naturally pays more attention to certain thoughts than others. Once we understand that, many things begin to make sense. We stop asking, why am I like this? And we begin asking, what is my brain trying to do? And I think that's a much more helpful question because the brain is not trying to make our life difficult. More often than not, it is just trying to protect us. The only problem is that sometimes it becomes a little overprotective. So, to understand why our brain works this way, it is really important for us to go back to thousands of years, not to modern cities, mm, smartphones, or workplaces, but to a time when the human brain was evolving in a completely different world. And that's where our story really begins. So, if I asked everyone listening a simple question, what is the brain's most important job? Many people might say to think, to remember, to make decisions, etc. And while all of these are definitely true, they are actually secondary. The brain's primary responsibility is very simple: to keep us alive, to protect us. So, as informed, let's go back to our ancestors, like thousands, 10 thousands of years ago. For our ancestors, survival wasn't guaranteed. Every single day brought new challenges, like finding food, protecting themselves from wild animals or predators, surviving harsh weather, avoiding poisonous plants, protecting their families. So basically, their life depended on noticing. danger quickly. Now imagine you're walking through a forest thousands of years ago. Everything seems quiet. Suddenly, you hear bushes moving nearby. At that moment, your brain has two choices. It can assume it is probably just the wind, or it can assume, secondly, there could be a predator hiding there or a wild animal hiding there which could attack me. Now, imagine there wasn't actually a predator. Your brain made a false alarm. Okay, so I want you to remember this word, false alarm. Maybe your heart raced for a few seconds, your breathing became faster, you looked around carefully, nothing happened. You survived. Now imagine the opposite. Your brain assumed everything was safe and I'm safe to go ahead, something like that. But there really was a tiger hiding behind those bushes. That mistake could cost your life. So, from an evolutionary perspective, making a few unnecessary false alarms was actually much safer than missing one real threat. Over thousands of years, our brain evolved to become extremely efficient at detecting anything that could potentially be dangerous. And this is where a very important part of our brain comes in. It is called as the amygdala. So don't worry about remembering the name. So what's important is understanding what it does, what amygdala does in the alarm systems and acts as an alarm system. You can think of the amygdala as the brain's alarm system. Its job is to constantly scan the environment for anything that could be threatening or potentially dangerous. The moment it detects a possible danger, it acts incredibly quickly in an instant. In fact, it can begin responding even before the thinking part of our brain has had enough time to carefully analyze the situation. So, once the alarm system is activated, it sends signals throughout the body. So, there are a few hormones in our body called stress hormones. Stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol are released before our thinking brain uh, gets the chance to act. Your heart starts beating faster, your breathing becomes quicker, your muscles become tense, your pupils may dilate, blood flow is redirected towards your large muscles so that your body is ready to respond. This automatic survival response is what we commonly know as the fight, flight, or the freeze response. So it depends on each situation. Depending on the situation, your body prepares to fight the danger or escape from it. Or in some cases, what happens is it remains completely still until the threat passes. All of this happens automatically or involuntarily. You don't consciously decide to increase your heart rate. You don't tell your body to release adrenaline. Your system simply takes over because its only priority is keeping you safe. Now, this system was incredibly useful for our ancestors. Without it, human beings probably wouldn't have survived long enough to evolve into the modern world. But here's something interesting. The survival brain wasn't designed to make us happy. It wasn't designed to keep us calm. It wasn't designed to help us enjoy life. Its main priority was just survival, just to protect us. And to survive, it had to pay much more attention to danger than to comfort. Think about it this way. Imagine our ancestors noticed a beautiful sunset that's pleasant, but nothing happens if they ignore it. Now imagine they ignored the sound of a predator nearby or a wild animal nearby. The consequences of that can be fatal or could have been fatal. So the brain gradually learns something very important. When in doubt, pay attention to the possible danger first. So I want to repeat this. When the brain is in doubt, pay attention to the possible danger first. Over time, this became one of the brain's default settings. In psychology, we call this as negativity bias. So, negativity bias simply means that our brain naturally gives more attention and importance to information that could signal danger or problems or potential threats than to information that feels pleasant or safe. In simple words, our brain is programmed to focus more on the negative problems or threats than to the information that is positive or feels safe. This does not mean we are negative people. It doesn't mean something is wrong with us. It simply reflects how our survival brain evolved. And even though our lives look very different today, that ancient survival system is still very much with us. The only thing that's changed is what our brain now interprets as a threat in the modern world. All right, so
Yes,
uh,
thank you very much for that opening with and with the and about the brain and the survival brain, etc. So and the brain talks. Gives the highest priority to a threat or negative experiences. So, if our brain naturally pays more attention to these threats or negative experiences, is that why we remember one criticism much more vividly than 10 compliments? Is that so? If it is, why does that happen?
that's a good question, Dr. Mani. And absolutely, yes. In fact, that's probably one of the best real life examples of what we have just discussed. Think about this. Imagine you have given a presentation at work. Afterwards, 10 people tell you that was excellent, you explained everything really well, great job. Naturally, you feel really happy. But just before leaving, one colleague or a friend of yours says, I think you could have spoken a little slower or a little bit louder, or your voice was not audible. So now what usually happens? You go home and somehow it's that one comment that keeps replaying in your mind. You might even find yourself wondering, maybe I didn't do well after all. Did everyone notice that? Or what if I wasn't as good as I thought? So what your brain does is it ignores all the compliments or the appreciation you got from 10 other people or your colleagues, and it just sticks on to one thing uh, where your colleague made one negative comment. So yes, negativity bias definitely plays a role. Our brain naturally notices criticism more quickly because, from an evolutionary perspective, criticism could signal something important that might help us avoid future mistakes. It is what your brain is trying to do is just trying to protect you from future disappointments or future mistakes. It doesn't want you to repeat those same mistakes again. But we cannot assume the same mistake can happen again in the future. It just ignores the positive or the neutral possibility as well. And it just focuses on the negative possibility that it might happen again. So, why does it stay with us for hours, sometimes days, and occasionally even years? In other words, why do negative thoughts stick? I think that's the part people find most frustrating. They often tell me, I understand why I noticed it, but why can't I just let it go? Why can't I just let the negative thoughts go? The answer lies in what happens after the thought appears. So let's go back to our example of the presentation. That criticism probably lasted no more than 10 or just 15 seconds. But what happens after that? You replay it while driving home, you think about it while having dinner, before going to bed, it pops into your mind again. The next morning, you remember it once more. Notice something? The event happened only once, but your brain has now revisited it several times. Every single time you return to that memory, you are strengthening it. So you are solidifying that thought again and again. It's almost like highlighting the same sentence in a textbook over and over again. Naturally, what happens is it becomes easier to find the next time you open the book when you highlight a sentence. Our memory works in a similar way. The more attention we repeatedly give to a thought, the more familiar and accessible it becomes. Now, compare that with compliments. Someone says you did a great job, you smile, you say thank you, and then you move on. Most of us don't spend the next 3 to 4 hours or half a day replaying the compliments in our minds. We don't keep analyzing them. So they don't receive the same amount of mental rehearsal or the repetition or the highlighting example that I gave you. I think this is one of the biggest reasons negative thoughts tend to stick, not necessarily because they were important, but because your mind wanted that thought to be important. And your mind thought that thought is important because you kept returning to that thought again and again. From the brain's perspective, repeated attention sends a simple message. This must be important because we keep thinking about it. And the brain responds by making that thought easier to access the next time. This brings us to another important concept in psychology called rumination. So, rumination, in simple words, means repeatedly thinking about the same problem, situation, or event without actually moving towards a solution. So, now it's important to understand that thinking itself isn't the problem. In fact, thinking is incredibly useful. If your car breaks down and you're trying to figure out where to get it repaired, that's productive thinking. You are actually moving towards a real solution. So, if you're planning your week, preparing for an interview, or solving a problem at work, that's also productive thinking. But rumination is different. Instead of asking, what can I do next? The mind keeps asking, why did this happen? What if it happens again? This is really important. It asks you, what if it happens again? And I should have said something better. Or what if everyone thinks badly about me? So hours may pass, yet nothing has actually been solved at all. You keep repeating the same thoughts again and again in your mind without actually moving towards a solution. That's why we make an important distinction in psychology between productive solving and repetitive thinking or rumination. Productive thinking moves you forward, rumination or repetition keeps you stuck. Another reason negative thoughts stay with us is uncertainty. So, this word is really important. Our brain generally doesn't like unanswered questions. It likes certainty, and 100% predictability of a situation. So, when information is missing, the brain tries to fill in the blanks. For example, your manager sends a message saying, "Can we meet tomorrow?" That's all, no explanation, no context. So, this is an unanswered question in your mind. So, immediately the brain starts generating possibilities, various possibilities like did I make a mistake? Am I in trouble? Is something wrong? Notice what happened? The brain didn't wait for evidence. It what it does was like it rushed to create possibilities. Now that's not because it's trying to upset us. It's just trying to prepare us for the worst case scenario possible. Okay. So as we discussed, it doesn't want you to get hurt or get disappointed, and it's trying to protect you. That's why it's giving you all sorts of possibilities just to prepare you. This is something called as catastrophizing. Catastrophizing simply means imagining the worst possible outcome and treating it as though it's the most likely one or the most uh, the probability that which can happen or it's the true thought. A small headache becomes what if something serious? One mistake at work becomes I'm going to lose my job. See the difference? Your brain is trying to jump into the worst possible scenario. So the brain keeps asking, what's the worst that could happen? Instead of what's the most likely outcome or what's the most productive thing that can happen right now. And before we realize it, one small thought has turned into an entire chain of anxious predictions. So if you step back and look at the whole picture, it becomes much easier to understand why negative thoughts stick. First, our survival brain quickly notices information that feels threatening. Then we keep returning to that thought again and again. The repeated attention strengthens the memory, or as I said, it highlights the sentence in a textbook. So, rumination or repetition of the thought convinces the brain that the thought must be important. Uncertainty or the unanswered questions encourages the mind to fill in the missing information. And catastrophizing or imagining the worst case scenarios pushes those possibilities uh, in your mind deeper. So, one process gradually leads to the next, and before we know it, we have become caught in a cycle of overthinking. The most encouraging part is that simply recognizing this cycle is often the first step towards breaking it. So, now let's talk about the modern day world or why today's world makes it even harder. The modern era, the today's era. So, if we step back and look at everything we have discussed so far, it becomes much easier to understand why negative thoughts stay with us. Our brain notices potential threats, we give those thoughts attention. The more we revisit them, the stronger they become. If uncertainty is involved, the mind naturally starts filling in the gaps. And before we realize it, one thought has turned into a chain of worries. So, if the survival system has existed for thousands of years, why does it feel like so many people today are struggling with stress, anxiety, overthinking, and negative thoughts more than ever before? So, the question comes to, has the human brain suddenly changed? No, the answer is no. In fact, the human brain has changed very little over thousands of years. What has changed dramatically is the world around us. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why our minds often feel so overwhelmed today. Our brain is still using the same survival mechanisms that helped our ancestors stay alive. The problem isn't that our brain has become weaker. The problem is that the environment has changed much faster than our brain has been able to adapt. This is really important. And think about our ancestors for a moment. Most of the dangers they felt were immediate. A wild animal, a shortage of food, harsh weather, an enemy approaching. So, these are some of the examples of the immediate dangers our ancestors faced. Once the danger disappeared, their body gradually settled down. The alarm system switched off. Life returned to normal until the next challenge appeared. So, today in the modern world, our dangers look completely different. Most of us aren't worried about predators anymore. Instead, we are dealing with deadlines. So, deadlines and work pressure, financial responsibilities, academic expectations, relationship conflicts, health concerns, traffic, constant notifications in your phone, and the uncertainty about the future. So, now I want you to imagine something. Imagine you are sitting at work, suddenly your phone vibrates. It's an email from your manager saying, can we meet tomorrow? So, as we discussed, no explanation, your mind just went on to fill in the gap. And logically, you know this email isn't a tiger waiting behind a bush, okay, or an animal waiting to attack you. But that same alarm system once helped our ancestors that we spoke about earlier can still become activated in the same way. So, what happens is within seconds, your heart rate may increase, your breathing changes, your muscle becomes tense. You may notice butterflies in your stomach, like as if something bad is going to happen. So, your mind immediately starts searching for answers. Am I in trouble or is something wrong? So, your body has entered that familiar fight, flight, or freeze response. Thousands of years ago, that response prepared our ancestors to survive physical danger and immediate danger, as we discussed. So, waiting for your medical reports, uh, it can be activated by an email or your medical reports, and upcoming interview, or a difficult conversation. The same brain that was involved can get activated. So, the threat has changed in the modern world, but the body's initial response can feel remarkably similar. So, now here is the main challenge. Unlike our ancestors, today's stress doesn't usually disappear within a few minutes. The email that your manager sent to you might stay on your mind the entire day. Financial worries can continue for months. Relationship difficulties may last for weeks. Health concerns can remain until test results arrive. In other words, our alarm system doesn't get many opportunities to completely switch off. So it remains active for much longer. Now let's add another factor that our ancestors never had to deal with: social media, like Instagram, Facebook, etc. I'm not saying social media is bad. It has many benefits. It helps us stay connected, learn new things, build communities, even access mental health information. But psychologically speaking, it creates situations that our brain was never designed to handle. So think about what happens within just 5 minutes of opening your phone. You see someone getting engaged, traveling abroad, or buying a new house. And your brain automatically, what it does is it starts comparing. You are comparing your everyday life with else's best moments. It's like comparing behind the scenes of your own life with the highlight reel of somebody else's. No wonder thoughts like this begin to appear, like such as I'm failing behind or I'm falling behind, everyone else seems happier, maybe I'm not doing enough, why isn't my life like this? Or comparison itself isn't new. Human beings have always compared themselves with others, but the scale has changed dramatically. So, because our attention naturally is drawn towards information that might signal danger. Remember the negativity bias that we discussed earlier? It hasn't disappeared. The digital world is simply giving it endless material to focus on. So it simply refers to the amount of information our brain is trying to process. Emails, phone calls, meetings, traffic. Our brain is constantly switching from one thing to another. Eventually, it becomes mentally tired, and when we are mentally exhausted, something interesting happens. Our ability to think calmly and objectively begins to reduce. Small problems start feeling much bigger than they actually are. And we become less patient, we are more likely to jump to conclusions. So, there's a concept called cognitive bias. They are simply mental shortcuts that help the brain make quick decisions, and every single one of us has them. So, by the end of the day, your brain can conclude nobody likes me at work, or perhaps you have been rejected from one interview. So, suddenly the mind says, I'm never going to get a job. See the difference here? You are just rejected from one interview because of many factors, but your brain creates a label. It's called as labeling. So, it's one of the cognitive biases that we talked about. So one experience slowly becomes a general conclusion, not because it's accurate or true, but because the brain is trying to make quick sense of the situation. So we notice criticism more than the appreciation, problems more than progress, and threats more than opportunities. It's not because positive things have disappeared, but because our attention has become selectively focused on what's wrong. We have an ancient survival brain living in a fast moving digital world, constantly exposed to information and endless stimulation. So, the brain hasn't become weaker, life has simply become much more mentally demanding. Instead of saying, why am I like this? We begin asking, given the way my brain works and the world I'm living in, what can I do differently? So that's where psychology gives us something incredibly hopeful, fortunately. So when we look at the bigger picture, everything starts coming together. And it's almost a perfect environment for overthinking and negative thoughts to strive because of the chronic stress and endless stimulation. The brain hasn't become weaker, and life has simply become much more mentally demanding. So instead of asking, why am I like this? We begin to understand maybe this is how my brain has learned to respond to the world around me. So that was about the modern world. And Dr. Mani, if you have any questions, you may ask before I proceed.
Yeah, so you're saying that the brain has learned to kind of respond to the modern world and to the changed kind of fast social media type of thing. But it's an ancient brain and it has adapted itself. That's what you're saying. And after understanding why our brain works this way and how today's world constantly activates these survival mechanisms, like you mentioned, three survival mechanisms, fight, flight, or flee. Can we actually change this? Do you think we can actually change this, or can we train a brain to think differently, or is it that we are simply wired this way for life?
Okay. And I think that's probably the most important part of today's question. The discussion. So, because after hearing everything we have spoken about so far, someone might be thinking, okay, so my brain evolved this way. Today's environment makes it even harder, and negative thoughts naturally stick. Does that mean I'm stuck with this forever? Fortunately, the answer is no. And that's because one of the most fascinating abilities of the human brain, it's called neuroplasticity. Now, please don't let the word sound complicated. Neuroplasticity simply means that our brain has the ability to change, adapt, and learn throughout our lives. For a long time, people believed that once we became adults, our brain was fixed. But today, with new researchers coming up, we know that's not true. Our brain is constantly changing based on our experiences, our habits, and even the way we repeatedly think and behave. Think of it like walking through a grassy field. The first time you walk through it, the path isn't very clear. But if you keep walking along the same route every single day, eventually a visible trail begins to form. Our brain works in a similar way. The thoughts we repeatedly think, the behaviors we repeatedly practice, the habits we repeatedly follow gradually become stronger pathways. That's why negative thinking becomes automatic. Not because we are choosing it, but because the brain has become very efficient at traveling down that same pathway every day. The encouraging part is new pathways can also be built. It takes time, it takes repetition. New pathways, as in the positive thoughts, or the balanced thoughts, or the thoughts which sound productive. So it takes time, it takes repetition, but it absolutely can happen. And that's one of the foundations of psychological therapy or counseling. Now, one misconception I'd like to address is that changing our thinking doesn't mean forcing ourselves to think positively all the time. So, suppose someone says, I'm definitely going to fail tomorrow's interview, replacing it with, I'm definitely going to get the job isn't necessarily helpful either because neither statement is based on evidence. Instead, where we what we do is we encourage people to ask. So, if we have the thought, I'm definitely going to fail, we encourage people to ask, what's the evidence for this thought? Is there another possible explanation? Or am I treating my fear as a fact? This is very important, where you treat a fear or a feeling as if it's a solid fact or evidence. This approach comes from a therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. CBT is based on a very simple idea. Uh, it's not always the situation itself that determines how we feel. It's often the way we interpret that situation. So, let me give an example. Can two people receive the same exact email from the manager saying, uh, can we meet tomorrow? One person thinks, I have probably made a mistake. They become anxious. They can't sleep. And the second person thinks maybe it's about the new project. See, the second person's thinking is much more neutral or pleasant. Or they might simply say, I'll find it out tomorrow. No worries. Same email, very different emotional experience. The difference isn't the situation, the difference is the interpretation. Now, if a close friend came to you and said to you, one person criticized my work, so I must be terrible at my job. Most of us, what we would do is we wouldn't agree with our friend's conclusion. We would probably say, Oh, hold on, that's a big conclusion based on just one comment. Interestingly, what happens is we are often much kinder and more rational with other people than we are with ourselves. One technique we use in CBT is called as cognitive restructuring. Again, please don't worry about the terminology. It simply means cognitive restructuring simply means learning to look at our thoughts from different angles instead of automatically accepting them as facts. Instead of asking, is this thought true? We ask, is this thought completely true? What evidence supports it? What evidence doesn't? Is there another way of looking at this situation? So sometimes just asking these questions reduces the emotional intensity. Now, another strategy I'd like to talk about is mindfulness. Mindfulness has become a very popular word recently. Sometimes it's even misunderstood. People think mindfulness means emptying your mind or stopping your thoughts. That's not the goal. The goal is to simply notice the thoughts as they come without immediately reacting to them. So imagine you are sitting beside a road, cars keep passing, you notice them, but you don't chase every single car. So similarly, not every thought needs to be analyzed, not every thought deserves our attention. Sometimes it's okay to simply notice, like I am having a worried thought right now, and let it pass. The small shift can make a big difference. So I would also like to briefly mention about gratitude because it's often misunderstood. People sometimes think gratitude means pretending everything is wonderful, but gratitude isn't about denying problems, it's about deliberately giving our brain evidence that life contains positive experiences too. Practicing gratitude helps us consciously notice what's also going right rather than only focusing on what's going wrong. So, another important factor is many people overlook is sleep. When we are sleep deprived or our emotional regulation becomes much more difficult, small problems begin to feel much bigger, we become more irritable. So it's actually helping the brain to regulate emotions more effectively when we are sleeping good. Yeah. And the next thing applies the same to the physical activity. Exercise isn't only good for our muscles or our heart, it's also one of the most well researched ways of improving mental well being. Even a consistent walk can make a meaningful difference. The next thing is self compassion. Many of us speak to ourselves in a way we would never speak to another human being. We made one mistake and suddenly we started calling ourselves useless, incompetent, or a failure. But we don't do that to our closest friends or our relatives or our siblings. So, would you speak to them like that? Probably not. So, why do we believe we deserve that kind of treatment to ourselves? Being compassionate towards yourself doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It simply means responding to yourself with same understanding and fairness you would offer someone you care about. So, if I had to summarize everything we have discussed in this section, I would say this: no, we cannot stop our brain from producing negative thoughts. That's part of being human. But can we change how we respond to those thoughts? The answer is yes. We can train our attention where we focus and we can question our assumptions. We can train our brain to focus on the positive thoughts or pleasant experiences more than the negative ones. And over time, gradually, the brain begins learning a different way of responding. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity. Our brain is capable of learning new patterns throughout our life. So, uh, here we come to the end of today's discussion. Would you like to say something, Dr. Mani,
Yeah,
before I
that
close?
was a wonderful discussion on how the brain has completely adapted from the olden ages to the modern age, and so why certain things are given more priority, and the threats and other things given more priority, and that's why negative thoughts are being given priority. But we ought to understand that these are now pretty normal, and that the yeah we know that we have to understand that the brain prioritizes survival over happiness. So basically, it is giving more importance to a threat or how to survive from the threat rather than whether happiness, because and that is how it is doing responding, and that's how it is trained to behave, wired to kind of behave, and so we have to actually, instead of we have to actually adapt to the way the our brain is currently working. I think it's the opposite is true. So we got to understand how the brain is working, and accordingly, we also change ourselves in tune with that, so that we can make the best use of what our brain is giving us. Right? That's I think what I can do. Put it in a layman's language. Maybe you can put it in a better way. Over to you.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And you have summarized it very well. And I think we all have understood the concept well on why does our brain focus on negative thoughts. But there is one takeaway from this conversation. That is, your brain is not trying to make your life difficult. More often than not, it's just trying to protect you or protecting you from future disappointments. The challenge is that it's using a survival system that evolved thousands of years ago to deal with the demands of modern life, that is today's world. And that's why it sometimes overestimates danger, holds on to criticism, expects the worst, or keeps bringing certain thoughts back again and again. So, today we have understood our brain naturally pays more attention to potential threats or danger than positive experiences. We have learned why criticism often stays with us longer than compliments, and why today's world with constant stress, comparison, and social media and endless stimulation can amplify or increase these natural tendencies. And we have also understood the negative thoughts themselves are not the enemy. Having a negative thought doesn't make you a negative person. It doesn't mean you are weak. It doesn't automatically mean you have anxiety or another mental health condition. It's just a part of being human. So, the real difference lies in how we respond to those thoughts, because we cannot control what thought comes in our mind. We just can control how we start responding to those thoughts, or uh, we learn to pause or question it or respond in a healthier or a more balanced way. Just because your brain says something doesn't make it a fact or doesn't make it true. Our thoughts are important, but they are not always accurate. Sometimes they are helpful, sometimes they are protective, and sometimes they are simply false alarms. The good news is that our relationship with our thoughts can change. So, our brain is capable of learning throughout life, and every time we challenge an unhelpful thought, uh, we are helping our brain build healthier patterns. These changes may not happen overnight, and that's okay. Real psychological change is usually gradual. Small, consistent steps often create the biggest difference over time. So before we end, I would also like to say something for anyone listening who feels that these thoughts have started taking over their life, or if your worries are becoming overwhelming, if you're constantly overthinking, if your sleep is disrupted, or your work, your relationships are preventing you from enjoying your every day life. And please know that you don't have to deal with it alone, or you're not alone. Seeking professional help isn't a sign of weakness. And just as we wouldn't ignore persistent physical pain, we shouldn't ignore emotional distress that's affecting our daily life or the quality of our life. So, finally, I'd just like to remind everyone of one thing: be patient with yourself. Your brain has spent years learning certain patterns. Give yourself permission to learn, to make mistakes, to grow, and to remember that progress doesn't mean never having negative thoughts again. It means learning not to let those thoughts control your life. And finally, thank you so much for listening today. And I hope this conversation has helped you understand your mind a little better, and perhaps more importantly, helped you become a little kinder to yourself. Thank you once again for having me. It was a truly a pleasure being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha ji. So it was a great talk. It was a superb talk, and something, or I mean, something very different. I mean, we didn't expect this kind of thing. I've not heard anything like this before about our own brains and how it is, working, how it is adapting, and how it is responding. So these things and how these things are changing as well. So basically, adapting to the new threats or new kind of whatever uncertainties. So having seen that and having seen you explain that, I think we have to kind of, it is like a tool, kind of, the brain is kind of a tool which is there, and so we have got to use it to the best possible way in which to achieve our life objectives, that I would call, which means everything under the sun. I mean, what for you are born, and why, what you want to do, and what are the objectives, have you achieved everything, and all those things. So definitely, and of course, happiness is always the, you have to always find way to be happy, and all that is what I feel. I mean, you can't wait for happiness to happen. Happiness, I mean, if you want happiness, you just go and get it, grab it. That's what I think. You can be happy right now. So you are happy in the sense you are happy right now. I mean, why? So don't panic, or don't get worried about the situation. These are the takeaways that I am from your talk. Like, don't get worried of the situation. Just respond, or just act by using this as a tool to achieve some of your goals. And basically, I think, and allow the brain to kind of adapt to things. And when it is doing so, you be a little patient, and also try to think about those thoughts. And don't be very you have to respond immediately or rush, anything like that. If there is time, then please sit and think about it. Think about the past, future, and about your current situation, and then slowly, mindful way, as you said, just in a mindful way, think about it, and then respond to that. So I think that is a better way of dealing with our life, rather than looking at us these focusing only on the negatives. No, let's allow the brain to focus on the negatives, and find a response pattern. And we, in the meanwhile, can take a break and relax, kind of. And when the brain comes out with a solution, definitely it will. I have seen that, because when I always go to sleep, I have a lot of problems in my life. I have some serious problems. I think about it and go to sleep. And the next day morning, pop, the answer comes out. The answer for how to solve that situation. And that really works out. So that means, something is happening in the unconscious level as well. And basically, the brain is working even though I am sleeping. And it has found the solution, and then it's giving it to me in the morning. So that's what I'm saying. So just be with the thought, allow the brain to, find a solution, and you will get it as soon as possible. So no need to worry. I think you just have to relax and be mindful, as you said. Thank you so much. I think that's how I would summarize it. So please let me know if that is the right, if I picked up your thought in the right way. So thank you, Aisha ji. So let me know that is it was that how do you what do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you have beautifully summarized it very well, and especially when you said when you have lots of problems going on in your mind and you just sleep off and allow your brain to come up naturally with the solutions the next morning, and that's really a way. So what happens is when we force ourselves for the solutions by thinking negatively or panicking, that also hinders the brain's ability to come up with positive thoughts naturally. So, the example that I gave about the car, sitting in the car and just notice other cars passing by. You just notice the negative thoughts coming up, notice them pass by, and that's it. You don't respond, believe them as true, and let your brain come up naturally with the solutions that it is like as a similarly like our ancestors, right? So yes, your conclusion was spot on and you have summarized it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashaji, for bringing this wonderful topic to our show and having also spent more, at least somewhere around an hour on with us, and taking time off from your very very busy schedule and coming to talk to us on a Monday morning. So I really appreciate what you have done, and we thank you with a lot of gratitude and thank you very much, Aisha ji. So I really appreciate the kind of the talk you gave and the kind of work you're doing. So we would like to support you definitely in all ways possible. And of course, we also look forward to seeing you on this channel on a regular basis. Hopefully, we can do that, and our viewers can get different, unique, very different topics. That much is assured. And so I conclude with that, and I would like to say that thank you once again. I thank you very much from the bottom of heart, and would like to see you again. So we will see you again soon. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for our viewers to have seen this podcast patiently. So thank you very much, and please join us to see and subscribe and share and like this video so that many we can give you many more such videos. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.